That's good. We are continuing today our study through Mark, and today we come to chapter 5. We're going to pick up in verse 21, and we're going to go all the way down to chapter 6, verse 6. And just as a reminder, as we've divided up our study through Mark, there are 3 acts in Mark, and we are currently in Act 1. This is a section that began back in chapter 1, verse 16, and goes to chapter 8, verse 26. And as we've also said, there are 3 cycles of stories in this act, in the first act, about Jesus' ministry in Galilee and surrounding regions. And so we're currently in the second cycle of Act 1, and that began back in chapter 3, verse 13. It's going to continue on down actually to the end of the passage that we're looking at today, chapter 6, verse 6. As we've noted throughout our study of Mark thus far, the kind of big idea, the overarching purpose of this gospel is Mark wants to show us that the suffering, crucified, and risen Jesus is the promised Messiah and Son of God. And he, as we have been seeing, has been demonstrating this over and over through Jesus' authoritative teaching, his many miracles and healings, and all that we've been seeing. And he is showing us that through these acts, the fulfillment of that which the prophets looked forward to in the Old Testament is now here, that in the person of Christ, that God's kingdom has come. It has been inaugurated. The new creation is being ushered in through the promised Messiah and King. We know it's not here in its fullness. That will be when he returns. But as Jesus said, chapter 1, verse 15, the kingdom is at hand. He is bringing the kingdom. As we come to our passage today, starting in verse 21, we're going to see even more evidence of Jesus' true identity as the Son of God, the Messiah. And we're going to see that as he's going to heal someone, he's going to heal another person, but he's also it's kind of almost an escalation, I think, because he's going to raise someone from death to life. If you're looking for maybe a theme that would bind together the 3 scenes that we're going to be looking at today, I think a good theme that you can draw out from this would be that of faith. Faith would surely rise to the top. In addition to demonstrating the identity of Jesus, who Jesus is, Mark also is wanting to teach us how are we to respond to this person, who is the Messiah, who is the Son of God incarnate. And what we're going to see is that we need to respond to him in faith, and especially in desperate times. And yet we're also going to see, and we've already seen this throughout our study as well, is that not all respond to Jesus as they should. Not all respond to Jesus in faith. And we'll see that in chapter 6 in verses 1 through 6. One commentator said that if chapter 5 could be called the no faith chapter, chapter 6 deserves the title. Chapter 5 could be called the faith chapter. Chapter 6 deserves the no faith chapter. And I think we'll see that as we come through these passages. So let's look now at Mark chapter 5. Let's just pick up in verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, and a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea, then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. So just point out a few things here. So Jesus, upon returning from Capernaum, we see he suddenly met here, it says, by a ruler of the synagogue named Jairus. Now, a ruler of the synagogue was someone that was a layman, and they would preside over the affairs of the synagogue. So this would include such things as the upkeep of the building, organizing, and even teaching in the services. But what's interesting about this man Jairus here is that as he's falling in desperation at Jesus' feet here, most likely he's a Pharisee. And most rulers of the synagogues were Pharisees. And if you recall, Jesus has not been too popular with the Pharisees thus far in his ministry. In fact, back in chapter 3, we saw that after Jesus healed the man with the withered hand, the Pharisees went out and conspired to kill him. And they subsequently accused him of blasphemy. So what that signals to us then is that this would have not been easy for this man Jairus to come publicly here and do what he's doing and fall down on his face in humility and ask for his help, because doing so would have surely ostracized him from his friends, probably from the religious establishment, maybe even cost him his position in the synagogue. And yet it's very apparent here, this man Jairus, he is desperate, right? Like the reason he does this is because he is broken. He is absolutely desperate, which is because, as Mark tells us here, his little daughter is at the point of death. And Luke's account tells us this was actually his only daughter, and later we find out she was 12 years old. And so you just got to kind of put yourself in his shoes here, and you can see, like, this is a father's heart that is breaking for his little daughter here. He is despairing. He is desperate, and he is watching his little girl die. And yet he has a glimmer of hope in his heart. He's heard, maybe even seen some of the miracles that Jesus has done and performed. And while the Pharisees, they're his friends, presumably, and yet they are Jesus' enemies, he's willing to set that aside. He has a glimmer of hope that maybe Jesus could do something to help his daughter. And so he risks he has a great risk here, isn't it, to his reputation as he reaches out in faith to Jesus. And as he does this, we read that immediately Jesus responds to his act of faith. Jesus doesn't turn him away, but he responds to his faith. And I think that should remind us that Jesus responds to our faith as well, especially in desperate times. Jesus, he responds when we come to him in faith. I remember as a new Christian, I was in a Bible study, and the Bible study leader, he asked this question, what is it that you see when you read the gospel? What is Jesus looking for above all else? And he said faith. He said, just read through it. He's just over and over, faith, faith, faith. And that always stood out to me, that what is he looking for in our lives? When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on this earth? Jesus loves our faith. He loves it when we come to him, and especially in desperation. And that reminds us that he responds to that. He loves that. So as they're setting out, the great crowd is following along. And suddenly, surely to Jairus' dismay, another person, an unexpected person, now approaches Jesus. So look at verses 25 and following. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. So Jesus is setting out with Jairus, right? The crowd is following along to go and attend and heal the daughter, Jairus' daughter. And yet then suddenly this woman appears, and she also is in great desperation. And we read here that she suffered for 12 years from internal bleeding. She spent all that she had on her illness, but yet to no avail. And in fact, doing so has only made things worse for her. And so this woman, she was the victim not only of a cruel disease, but just the hopeless treatment of it. She'd spent all she had and was therefore broke. Not only that, this woman would have been ostracized from her community. She would have been considered unclean according to the law, and therefore she would have been cut off from society, excommunicated from the temple. And so put yourself in this woman's shoes. I mean, she was also despairing, right, and hopeless. If she had been married, the rabbis declared that a woman with such a disease had to divorce her husband. So if she had kids, they would have only been able to see her at a distance. I mean, this woman was in a bad place. No doubt despairing, hopeless. Just like Jairus, she also is very desperate. And hope seems to be lost. But it's interesting, you can see that there's a similarity here. I mean, these two that approached Jesus, and on the one hand, they couldn't be more different. One is a wealthy, respected leader, religious leader. The other is this shunned outcast, ostracized from society. And yet on the other hand, at the same time, they really couldn't be any more alike. Not only because they are both hopeless, but also what they both do in response to their desperation, in response to feeling just utterly powerless. And what is it that they do? Well, what we see here is they both reach out to Jesus in their desperation. They come to Him. They let go of their fear, and they reach out in faith to Jesus. It's really a beautiful picture of what we need to do, what we must do when we find ourselves in hopeless situations in our lives. Just like Jairus and this woman, we need to let go of fear and just go to Jesus, reach out to Jesus, simply have faith in Him, go to Him. And that is a picture of faith. They are both expressing faith, and no matter how small it may be, we understand that it's not the size of our faith that matters. Sometimes I think we can think about faith, it's like I got to believe more, have bigger faith, and yes, we want that, but it's not the size. It's the object of our faith that is what counts. Right? Jesus said even a little grain of mustard seed of faith can move mountains. I think it's something like that. But faith in and of itself is only good insofar as who we put our faith in. We don't have faith in faith. We have faith in Jesus. It is the object of our faith that makes faith powerful. And as we see, Jesus, He responds to our faith. The object of our faith is powerful because the one we put our faith in is compassionate and merciful and good. And He delights to respond to those who would reach out to Him. And so Mark is showing us a picture of faith, what it looks like. It is grabbing a hold of Jesus. It's coming to Him in our powerlessness and our inability, and expressing our dependence upon His power, upon His goodness, and putting our trust in Him. Just as an application, maybe you've been in situations like that in your life. You feel powerless. You feel you are going through something hard. Reach out to Jesus, right? That's a reminder to us. Go to Him. Have faith in Him. No matter how small it may be, remember that He delights to share His power with you. And that's what we see happening to this woman. She reaches out to Jesus to touch His garment. She has faith that He would do it. Remember what she said going back. She said, even if I touch His garments, I will be made well. Do you see the confidence, the faith that she has? And so that's what happens. Jesus heals her. Verses 29 and through 34. In one moment, this woman is healed of her disease. And not only that, but it seems that she also gets saved as well. As Jesus says here, your faith has made you well. And that can mean either heal or to save, which would suggest both a physical and a spiritual healing. And He also calls her daughter, which would signify she's not only healed physically, but also welcomed into the family of God. So Jesus responds to our faith. Now maybe you hear that and you think, okay, I get that. I need to come to Jesus in my desperation. I need to reach out to Him in my desperation. But what about times in our lives when we are doing that, and yet we're not seeing Him move? We're not seeing Him respond how we might want or we might think He should. What do we do in such times? And we're not looking to other things. We're not abandoning Jesus. We are, as best as we can, trying to believe Him, trying to trust Him. But what about when it seems that He's not moving in my situation? What do we do? Well, we can go to the story, and I think Jesus, in what He does with Jairus, now turning back to Jairus, helps us with that question. So coming back to the story, remember Jairus has reached out to Jesus in his desperation. We saw he responded to the request to heal his daughter, but then he sidetracked. He was sidetracked by this woman who appears out of nowhere and has the issue of blood. And so think about it, that on the one hand, it must have been encouraging for Jairus that Jesus responded. And yet on the other hand, as this was happening with the woman, he's probably getting frustrated. Because while this is going on, the clock is ticking on his daughter. He said back in verse 23, she was at the point of death. So this is like a minute-by-minute situation. Every second counts. Well, Jesus wants to teach Jairus a few more things about faith beyond the initial faith that he's already expressed. So look at verse 35. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" You could just imagine Jairus' heart must have sunk. I mean, like, what happened? In just this one terrible moment, the initial hope that he had is vanquished, right? Time has run out. His daughter is dead. I think about what's going on in Jairus' mind here. Surely he's frustrated, right? I mean, here was this woman who has a non-life-threatening illness. She's had it for 12 years. I mean, surely he could have just said, hey, can you wait here for a couple of hours? I'll come back. But I've got an urgent situation here. And yet we saw that Jesus stopped everything. He attended to the woman. However, in doing so, in that time, what happens? Jairus' daughter dies. And so just imagine Jairus, he's probably thinking, I mean, Jesus, how could you do this to me? I thought you were the Messiah. I thought you had power like no one else. I thought I could trust you. Well, just as quickly as Jairus is told that his daughter has died, Jesus turns and looks at him, and he says something incredible. Look at verse 36. He says, do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. So now things are really interesting. He has had this glimmer of hope that he could do something to heal his daughter, but now she doesn't just need healing, she needs a resurrection, right? So Jesus, what he's doing is taking his faith to a whole new level. In verse 36, he says to him, when he says this to him, do not fear, only believe. This is a command for present tense, continuous action. So the sense is be believing and keep on believing. So don't just believe once like you had initially, but keep believing, Jairus. Hold on to the faith you first had when you first came to me. But don't fear, don't despair, keep believing, don't give up. I think that's a reminder of what Jesus would say to us when we find ourselves in those kinds of times, right? When it seems like he's delaying, when it seems like nothing is happening. He would say, keep trusting, keep believing, don't give up. That's what he wants Jairus to see here. He wants him to hold on even though there has been a delay. So verse 37 and following, he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talita kume, which means, little child, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. It's amazing, isn't it? Imagine seeing that. This girl has died. He raises her from death to life. Again, it's pointing to who Jesus is, the authority of Jesus. He's the Son of God. He is God the Son who has taken on human flesh. He's bringing God's kingdom to this earth. He's demonstrating, Mark is showing us that Jesus is demonstrating who he is. But in doing so, in the midst of that, we are learning of how to respond to Jesus. We are to respond to him with faith in the Messiah. And so just imagine what that must have done, seeing that would have done for Jairus' faith. As he goes from believing that he could heal his daughter to now believing he can raise the dead, and seeing it happen before his eyes. And so he's teaching Jairus here not only to let go of your fear and come to me in desperation, but to hold on to me in delays, to not give up, to keep trusting, keep believing. That's another aspect of faith then, isn't it? It is to hold on in delays. There's times in our lives when we are just not seeing answers. We're not seeing those prayers being answered for whatever reason. It seems like he's not listening. Nothing is changing in our situation. And it can be tempting in those times to give up, to have an unbelieving attitude, an unbelieving heart. It reminds us that God hears our prayers. He always hears, and He's in control. He is going to respond in his own timing, in his own way. So we need to hold on to him, and that's an expression of faith also. It is not just faith. It's not just an initial thing you have. It is something that we are to continue to have throughout our whole lives. Faith in the Messiah. So let's go to chapter 6, and we're going to see now an entirely different picture in response to Jesus, really. And it reminds us again that unfortunately not everyone responds to Jesus with such faith. So look at chapter 6, verse 1. And he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue. So after Jairus, his daughter, is raised up, at the end of chapter 5, Jesus here says, goes away from there. Most likely that was Capernaum, as I understand it. And now here Mark tells us he comes to his hometown. And it doesn't say what that is, but we know that's Nazareth, right? We know from chapter 1, verse 9, Jesus came from Nazareth. Chapter 1, verse 24, he's referred to as Jesus of Nazareth. From the Gospel of Luke, we know that although Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Nazareth was the place he was raised. And just a few comments about Nazareth that I found interesting. I think the best word to describe Nazareth would be obscure. This was a place that was 200 to 400 people population at best, or at most. It's a tiny little village made up of about 60 acres of rocky hillside, just like a tiny little craggly town, very rural area. And when all is said and done, there's just not much about it, not much even said about it. In the Old Testament, it's not even mentioned, nor in any of the rabbinic literature of the day, nor Josephus, who was the most famous Jewish historian of the time. I remember Nathanael when he saw Jesus, and what he said about him, John 1:46, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Kind of gives you an idea about why he would say that, right? But just think about it. That is where God sent his son to be raised. Not in a palace, right? But in this little village, little obscure place. Speaks of the humility of Jesus. I think it's amazing to think about that. As Mark says here, though, in verse 1, so Jesus comes to his hometown. He comes back there. He had been there before and was rejected actually before, but now he's coming here and his disciples are with him. And we read that on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. So again, this is a very small town here, right? 200 to 400 people at most. And you know, you probably have experienced this about small towns. Everybody knows everybody, right? You can't hide in a small town. And so everybody knows Jesus here. They've watched him grow up before their eyes. They say, "Is this not the carpenter?" In other words, like, who does this guy think he is? This is just the local carpenter down the street. Who does he think he is? I mean, he's not better than us. And he's certainly not the Messiah. So do you see the contrast in the faith that we saw in the last chapter with here, just this unbelief and familiarity. And they refer to him here as the son of Mary, which is interesting. During this time, even if a man's father was dead, he would always still be referred to as the father's son. But here to call Jesus here the son of Mary was to cast a certain stigma upon him and Mary. In other words, they were raising doubts about the legitimacy of his birth. You remember Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. And so it seems there were rumors circulating about the illegitimacy of his birth. And yet at the same time, there's a tension, right? Because they see that he has incredible wisdom in the way he teaches. And they say, how are such mighty works done by his hand? And so they can't wrap their minds around it. That things could be done by someone of such ordinary background and origin. And so as a result of this, it says at the end of verse 3, they took offense at him. Literally, it means to cause to stumble or to be put off or to be repelled by him. The reason they're repelled by him is that he's acting out of his place in their eyes. They're offended that someone of such humble origins could do this. And someone just like them would claim to be somebody. Who does he think he is? Let alone God's agent of salvation. This isn't what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be in the carpenter's shop. And here he is going around claiming to be someone special. All of that leads to what Jesus says to these people in his own hometown here it says in verse 4, and Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. This is an ancient proverb similar to the modern saying, maybe you've heard it before, familiarity breeds contempt. Anybody ever heard that? Familiarity breeds contempt. In other words, when all is said and done, we can see here plainly that the people of Nazareth are simply too familiar with Jesus, aren't they? They're just too familiar with him. They had seen him grow up as a boy and into a man, and they don't have a category to think that this might be the Messiah. And so like the many prophets before him, Jesus is resented, despised, and rejected by the people in his own town. And so look at the sad consequences of their contempt toward Jesus, verses 5 and 6. And he could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. It's not saying that it was physically impossible for Jesus to do miracles there. He did heal a few sick people. The point is that it stands in direct contradiction to the character and the will of Jesus to do mighty works in a place where there was such familiarity and unbelief. It would have been spiritually and morally inconsistent. And notice again in verse 6, which says, he marveled because of their unbelief. So just consider the blessing that these people had. They had the advantage of seeing the Son of God be raised in their town. 30 years, somehow it flew under their radar, his holiness, his innocence. And yet now here he is preaching and carrying out miracles. And yet they're blind to it. They can't see it. They're blind to his character. Their ears are deaf to the words that he says. Their hearts are hardened. And so as a result, Jesus looks at them and he just marvels at their unbelief. He can't believe it. It boggles his mind, the unbelief of these people. Why were they so unbelieving? Well, I mentioned the proverb analogous to the modern saying, familiarity breeds contempt. We could say it maybe this way. Familiarity breeds unbelief. Familiarity breeds unbelief. And just by way of application as we finish, I think we should ask this question here. Have we ever in our lives, like the people of Nazareth, become so complacent and familiar with Jesus that we have fallen into unbelief, having an unbelieving heart? Not that I'm not saying we're not saved or something like that, but we can, as believers, fall into an unbelieving heart. We can struggle to have faith, and our faith can be weakened. And we can profess it with our lips, right? We can praise the Lord with our lips all day long, but we're not really believing. We've kind of lost faith that Jesus can do mighty things among us. And I think there is a particular application here to the challenge of small towns and rural areas. And that is this unique. There's a unique way in which in small towns, rural areas, in which there's the challenge of familiarity. Familiarity is becoming too familiar with the things of God such that we begin to take them for granted. And suddenly the good news of the gospel becomes old news to our hearts. And I came across an article by Stephen Whitmer. It's called Small Town Savior. And it was on the Gospel Coalition website, and he made some helpful insights here about the unique challenges of small towns. First, smaller towns often consist of those who don't want anything to do with the rat race and more fast-paced life that characterizes cities. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're not careful, that can lull us into a certain complacency and contentment with the status quo, and therefore there can be this kind of reluctance to change, and even a certain pride in mediocrity that can set in. And he points out that as a result of this, we can easily become over-familiar with the things of God and what it is that He wants to do among us. And the second thing he mentions is that often smaller towns aren't as progressive as the postmodern cities That we see that right in cities, large cities today, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, it can also make Christianity and church acceptable. In that that is more of a veneer than a deep reality, and so he continues saying it can become more that church is more about like attendance, traditional values, cultural Christianity, and the result is that we miss the presence and the power of Jesus and what it is that he's wanting to do among us. And then the third thing he says is that small towns can tend to form tight-knit bonds with one another. Again, that's a good thing, but there's also a danger in that, or we need to be careful with that, and that our tight-knit bonds with one another don't make us skeptical and resistant toward outsiders. Again, the result being that we become over-familiar with the things of God and what it is that He wants to do among us. So those tight-knit bonds are good, right? But if it's creating this skeptical kind of thing about outsiders, right, whoever that may be, something has gone wrong in our hearts, right? That's not the heart of Christ. It's a good reminder to us. It's to say that familiarity with the things of God, and there is a particular danger in smaller towns and rural areas, is deadly. It really is. It's deadly. And we begin to take for granted the blessings we have, what God is doing. We become complacent to the things of God, and we need to be aware of that. So what hope do we have in the midst of this? There is, as I finish, there's some encouragement here that if you notice, 2 of the 4 half-brothers of Jesus, named in verse 3, James and Jude, what did they go on to do? Well, they went on to write 2 books of the New Testament, right? Both of them, this wouldn't happen until after His resurrection, but they would later come to faith in Jesus. And they would go from seeing Him as their mere brother to their Lord. And it's a reminder to us, it's an encouragement to us, that even those who at one time were familiar with the things of God can change, right? We can change. Churches can change. We should never write churches or anyone off, because that person who has become familiar and is in unbelief, they can go from being a person who's like sitting in church, I've heard every sermon, murmuring about whatever, the carpet, whatever it might be. That person can change, and they can become a person who in seeing the glory of Christ in a fresh way, and knowing Christ, they can become a person set on fire for Him. Even to the point, as the apostles, many of the apostles were willing to die for Him, and in fact did die for Him. God can change us, right? It's a great encouragement that as we faith in Christ, trust in the gospel, coming back to the glorious gospel and what He has done, it has the power to renew our hearts through the power of His Spirit.